Hey, I just wanted to make a relatively quick video today to talk about a new exciting piece of news in the handheld PC space, and that is the advent of one of the first Ryzen AI 9HX handsets, potentially the second OLED PC handheld to hit the market after the Steam Deck OLED, unless the Zotac Zone actually shows up in anybody's hands here in the US, and that handheld is the Onexfly. Now this is the previous F1 model with the 7840U. There's another 8840U model with the same LCD screen in it, but this brand new Pro moniker refresh is going to have the Ryzen AI 9HX 365 or 370, as well as an 8840U variant. So I just want to talk a little bit about that, talk about my experience with this handheld and why it is my daily driver, and why I'm pretty excited about this new OLED handheld release coming to market. So talking about specs for this new handheld, like I mentioned, we're going to get the Ryzen AI 9HX chipsets, the 365, the 370, as well as the pre-existing 8840U, but they're all going to come with this new OLED 144Hz 1080p screen. I think largely the device is going to remain unchanged from the hardware that we see on this existing model here in terms of how it's laid out, the weight, the overall performance and use of the device is going to be mostly the same other than that major screen change. Now, those chipset changes will introduce some variations, but I've watched a couple videos from the Fox and ETA Prime that have done some comparisons using current laptops that have released with those new chipsets. We don't have any handhelds with those AI 9 chipsets just yet, but performance gains within games is anywhere from about 6 to 25%, I think, with the average landing somewhere in between there. So we're not going to see monumental, like, next generation difference between the existing 7840U chipset handheld and the new one, but it is going to be nice to see a little bit of a bump, and maybe that just means you can run at the same frame rates, but drop your wattage by 10 to 20%, 10 to 20% longer battery life. Who's going to complain at that? The current Onexfly does have a 48 watt-hour battery in it. They haven't released the exact specs for the new Onexfly yet, but I don't expect the battery is going to be any larger because the weight hasn't gone up and the chassis hasn't changed. So unless they can perform some sort of miracle, I don't think that they're going to be able to put a whole lot more in terms of battery into that. So that's really it, as the major changes is going to be the screen and a little bit of a performance gain. But that being said, I want to take a little bit of time to show you my existing Onexfly model, talk about my experience with it, and maybe based on my opinion of that model, you can make a decision on whether the new Onexfly F1 Pro makes sense for you. All right, so let's jump in and see what the Onexfly has to offer. We're going to look at the stuff that is probably not changing between the old and new model, just so you can know what to expect. You know, all of this is subject to change as we find out more details, but like I said, I think mostly the screen and the CPU are going to be the major difference. So let's take a look. And with a quick tour of the device, starting on the top here, we've got our standard bumpers and triggers. The bumpers here are membrane, and they're pretty nice. They make a little bit of noise, but overall these are pretty quiet as far as bumpers go. The triggers both have a very nice smooth resistance and a decent travel. Really no complaints there at all. We've got our power button, our volume rocker, headphone jack. One nice thing about the Onexfly products is not only do we get a USB-C port here, we also get a USB-A port, as well as if we flip it over, we have yet another USB-C port on the bottom, which is a really nice feature to have, especially if you're using something like AR glasses or you're docking, to have multiple options to plug items in. On the bottom, we also have the TF card, micro SD slot, as well as our two down-firing speakers. Back up on the top, the last thing I didn't mention is we have these little macro buttons that are just inset from the bumpers. Now, these aren't the easiest locations to reach, so I wouldn't use them necessarily for functions in games, but they're kind of handy to map OS buttons. Like I think we have the Xbox guide button here that can also be used for Steam and the like, so that is kind of nice to have. Looking at the back of the device, we do have that large single fan intake here. There's a mechanism adapter on here. This isn't part of the handheld, but something that I use, and I think I'll actually have an upcoming video detailing a cool project using that. Just some logo and badging, but no really macro buttons on the back or anything like that, which is a bit of a disappointment to have them on top and not on the back, but you know, it's not a big deal. The plastic here on the back is this nice soft touch, but the downside here there is, and you can even see it here, I swear I'm not a nasty person, but this matte texture really picks up the finger grease. I wipe this down all the time, so unfortunately, if you're a stickler for your devices looking perfectly clean, then that might drive you nuts, but it actually feels pretty nice to touch. And then back on the front, let's just take a look at the remaining features of the device. And I'm going to pull up an input tester here so we can kind of kill two birds with one stone. Okay, so taking a look at the front of the device, first thing you might notice is that these joysticks are a little bit on the smaller side. We can test the circularity here and see that they do have pretty nice, less than 1% average error there. So these are nice, accurate Hall joysticks. Now, they do look kind of like Switch sticks, but I assure you, these are not Switch sticks. They have a much thicker shaft on them and a little bit more of a tilt. So they're kind of a medium joystick. They might not be the perfect thing if you really prioritize a big joystick, then the Ally and Steam Deck and the like are going to make more sense for you. For me, it's not a huge deal breaker, and I like to put my traditional skull and coal toppers on there, which make them a little bit bigger and nicer, so that's always an option. The D-pad on the left here, I would say is acceptable. I don't get any false diagonals. It's nice in terms of getting the correct input. I can still roll if I need to, so really no issues there, but it's kind of just like a B- D-pad. It gets the job done. It doesn't really have any issues, but it's also not something that I'm just super in love with. It does have this shiny texture, and I kind of wish the texture was a little bit different. But for the types of games that I'm mostly playing on this, not a big deal. And it's still a lot better D-pad offering than I have seen on some larger handhelds. Up top, we've got Start and Select, which are in, thankfully, what I consider the correct location. So it's always nice to see that. On the bottom here, we have a Return to Desktop button that can be handy when navigating Windows. And then on the right side here, we have the quick menu, and then if you hold that down, that'll bring you into the game launcher, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then a dedicated keyboard button, which is pretty handy on a Windows handheld. By default, it does bring up the Windows keyboard, but this keyboard here is the Onexplayer keyboard, and you can toggle this on, and then it allows you to use the joystick to do input. And then lastly, we have the face buttons over here. I think this is actually one of the really nice things on the Onexfly. They're not loud, they're membrane. I would say they're quieter than an Xbox. We can even kind of show off that real quick here. So here's the Onexfly. Here's the Xbox, Onexfly, Xbox. So as you can see, those are nice and quiet. I can play next to somebody without annoying them. They're a little bit on the small and medium side, but I find them to be appropriate. They don't have too much travel, but still being satisfied to press. So they really do have a nice feel there. So I have no complaints at all about the face buttons on here. To sum up the inputs, I think that the joystick size might be a turnoff for some, and the D-pad is pretty good, but not great. Everything else is really quite good. So I'm pretty happy with the inputs of the device altogether. Now, one thing that is really special about this device to me is the weight. This comes in, I think I just weighed it yesterday on my scale at 600 grams. I think the advertised weight is slightly less than that, but I do have the little adapter here on the back that's adding a few grams. And that means that this thing is really nice and light. Now, since it is smaller, it's significantly smaller than something like the Ally or Steam Deck, it still feels dense and solid and not cheap at all. But it's light enough that I can play holding it up with my arms on the couch and not have my hands or my arms fall asleep, which is really a nice thing. With both the Ally and the Steam Deck, I do suffer that issue. Unfortunately, the Ally X, I was hoping would fix all those problems with improved ergonomics, and while it is better, the weight and the shape of it still made it a little hard for me to hold. Now, that being said, ergonomics is a very personal thing, and Stubbs has the Onexfly and feels that it's a little too small or doesn't have enough grip for him, so maybe his hands are a little bit bigger or he just holds his devices differently. For me, it really fits perfectly into the palms of my hands. I can access all the controls without any issue, and it's really comfortable. So for me, that's why this device is a winner and the biggest thing. So, thinking about the new Onexfly Pro, this is going to be the smallest, lightest, OLED, highest performance 7-inch device that you're going to find once that comes out. There may be other options, but they're probably going to be larger or heavier or both, or maybe they have a slower chip. So I'm really excited at what they are bringing to market with this Onexfly F1 Pro that is coming up. As far as audio goes, the clarity is really nice on here. No complaints about any harsh frequencies or anything like that. They just aren't going to have as much bass and resonance as something like the Steam Deck or the Ally, so that's something to keep in mind. And let's just take a quick listen to a sound clip. And after listening to that sound clip myself, I would say that this is probably actually one of the better audio devices, except for the fact that the Ally, MSI Claw, and Steam Deck exist. Those three are kind of on the top of the pile, but I would put this above the Legion Go, I think, and most other smaller handhelds. So I wouldn't say that it's a con at all. It's just not as good as the Ally X. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time talking about the display here, since as far as the F1 Pro is concerned, it's going to be a brand new OLED 144Hz display. But I will say that this is a 7-inch 120Hz 1080p display, and it's actually really good. I don't have any complaints about light bleed, about ghosting. Given that they've selected this good of a panel here, I have high hopes that the OLED panel is just as good and exceedingly better, because you're going to get those deep black contrast out of that panel. One note, these are not VRR panels either here or on the upcoming F1 Pro. You know, the Ally has that, and that's sort of a differentiator that it has over other handhelds. I've used both, and while I do really enjoy VRR and think it brings something cool to the table, I don't know that it's like 100% mandatory deal breaker. Yes, I wish that all handhelds had it, but I think I'd take OLED over VRR. Let me know what you think about that down in the comments. Would you prefer to have VRR and LCD, or OLED with no VRR, all other things being equal? So let's talk about the software here. I'm imagining that this is going to be the exact same with the new handheld, so a good point of reference here. I would say that the software on this device is functional, if not pretty. It gets all of the key things done in terms of adjusting the performance, the brightness, the volume, your various overlays and settings. It might not be as well polished as something like Armory Crate, but I don't think it necessarily hinders from the device experience. It just is and it exists, and of course you can use third-party options if you so desire. As I mentioned earlier, having a dedicated keyboard button is a kind of nice little feature as well. If you hold down on the turbo button, it brings the launcher, which is actually surprisingly not that bad. It seems to pick up games from my various collections and platforms without too much issue, and scrapes some artwork that you can see in the background there and allows you to launch them. I usually just use Steam Big Picture on here, but it is nice to see that that's in there. We also have various controller programming options, allows you to remap different buttons, add macros, etc. From that screen where you can reprogram the controller, you can also access things like the dead zones and sensitivity curves on the joysticks, so they have a pretty good level of control and granularity on the controls that I really can't complain about on this handheld. Dead zones, accuracy, none of that has been an issue for me. The only drawback being that they aren't full-size sticks, but still better than Switch. As far as heat, temperature, and cooling goes, I've never had an issue with this. It does get a little bit of hot in the center of the back, but nowhere that your hands rest. A little bit on the screen if you're running high TDP. Again, not an issue. Fan noise is relatively quiet on this, despite being only a one-fan handheld. It might not be quite as quiet as the Ally, definitely quieter than the original LCD deck, as well as a vast variety of Ioneo and other handhelds. So that's actually a big stipulation for me too when picking a PC handheld, is that it's not too loud when the fan is on, playing in the higher TDPs. I've run this thing at 20 plus watts without any issue. In terms of battery life that you get out of this, it is 48 watt hours, so it's just slightly better than the original Ally. The nice thing is that when you turn the overlay on, it shows here the hours remaining on the battery based on the current total system draw. So you can see right now, I think even though I have the TDP set to, 13 watts here, it's only drawing less than that because it's not doing anything, and it's estimating about 3.7 hours at that rate. I can attest from gameplay that in lighter indie games, getting 3 to 4 hour estimates is not a problem at all. Doing some game streaming or maybe low-end emulation, seeing 4 to 5 hours is also possible on this handset. But of course, at the high end, you're looking at between 1 and 2 hours when you're pushing it beyond 15 watts into that 20-25 watt territory to play games with more demanding performance needs. But even though it's not going to beat the Ally X or the Steam Deck OLED, you are still going to get about 20% more battery than the original Ally and other 40 watt hour PC handhelds. All right, so now that you've taken a look at some of the things that I really love about the Onexfly and why I think it's a interesting handheld in the market that may have Onex flew under the radar for the past year or so, what do you think? Do you think that the new OLED handheld is going to be the one to get? Is it no contest against the Ally X and its enormous 80 watt hour battery and more established software and ecosystem, or maybe even the Steam Deck OLED? Of course, you're still only getting that 800p and lower performance on there, and it is a big chunky boy, so I do still prefer the Onexfly in terms of size. And you know, there's a bevy of other handhelds out there, the Legion Go, Ioneo offerings, but this may be one of the first handsets to market that has both OLED and this new Ryzen AI chipset. We did recently see Ioneo tease their Ioneo 3 with an all-glass front, but that's really the only detail that we've been able to see from the pictures yet. Is that going to be OLED? Is it going to be 7 inches? Is it going to be 8 inches? We really don't know a whole lot about that handheld. In typical Ioneo fashion, they are drip feeding us that information a little bit at a time. And I think it's still going to be months to come before it's officially announced, and potentially more months to come before it's shipped. So I have no doubt that the Onexfly is going to come to the market before that. You know, the Zotac Zone was announced, and there's a couple outlets with reviews, but honestly, we're all a little stumped here in America, just wondering where the heck is the Zotac Zone? I mean, I don't know. That said, the Zotac Zone does not have a larger battery, and it is a significantly larger unit, though it has the same size OLED screen. So maybe if you're somebody that has, you know, Stubbs hands and prefers a little bit bigger of a handheld, then the Zotac Zone might make more sense than the Onexfly to you. But for somebody like me who has suffered from carpal tunnel syndrome for the last 5 to 10 years, then you know, a light handheld is way bigger of a priority for me than something that just has big meaty grips. But you know, ergonomics is a very personal thing. So you guys let me know in the comments what you think. Stay tuned and see if we have more content coming about PC handhelds and handheld gaming. And as always, thanks for watching and happy gaming.